Okay, this video titled The Leaven of Calvinism and Arminianism certainly connotes the negative idea of leaven, but that's really part of the lesson to show what's aroused, recalled, incited by even the mention of the term leaven, and then to attribute it to something as we call Calvinism and Arminianism, established soteriological constructs. Then it will help us understand a little bit more about this word here. It's zeme, which that doesn't really help, but anyway, it's trying to write it out in English best I can. But when you take the word in, the preposition in, and you add it to zeme, then you'll notice the word becomes enzyme, and you notice the chief function. First you go from zeme to enzime and enzyme, and this is the modern Greek. That's German, I believe, is what it is. But you can look that up. I think I've got on the thumbnail, it'll be there. But if you're in the Koine Project Class, just think of this for a moment. As we've discussed before, this catalyzes. And this is where if you say something in class, or you are hesitant to say something, our words are very charged now. People become very catalyzed, if you will. Reactions begin to occur. People have made investments. People have crossed lines. Let's say you've alienated yourself from someone because of some vitriolic banter about Calvinism or Arminianism or whatever. But we're just using those two for example. But you'll find that there's really not much you can do if you study the language. Give example, this tiny little book, How English Grammar to Ace Biblical Hebrew, Miles V. Van Pelt. Excellent book. Oh, matter of fact, still has the price tag. It's language study, $14.99, Zondervan.com. And it says that Miles Van Pelt is Associate Professor of Old Testament and Academic Dean at Reformed Theological Seminary in Jackson, Mississippi. So he is of a Reformed theology, and yet he teaches these languages, which that means he's in an environment that would probably be categorized as Calvinistic even, but now Reformed theology and Calvinism have its differences. But you know, it seems like people have all the energy for all of that over and over, endless study, and then they'll say, no, I don't study Greek or Hebrew. Okay, well, this is a language-based apologetic. So on page 79, it mentions the causative stem, hefil stem, and if you go into the book of Exodus, the Old Testament, several places, even in Genesis, we have causal action. Now, why that's there is obviously God had created man a causal being, so we are causal in our actions. Matter of fact, to deny that really would only be necessary to support the leaven. For example, priming is a technical word where we're given something, we're taught something. So let's just do this. Let's just introduce what many people feign to be one of the greatest challenges of all time. And they say free will, and that turns into just to say the word or the phrase. If you make it two words and they're referring to free will, then it turns into the bound versus free. There. Banter. And of course, it's really not honest. Those of you that have been in the Koine Project Class know this is really, it's not just, which I won't even begin to then say versus God's sovereignty. We're not going there yet, but we can't even use this phrase without learning that there's libertarian free will, and even degrees of that. Some have said, well, you could have done otherwise. Well, but then they admit not always. Circumstances and all types of variables come into play. And then the compatibilism acknowledges and co-depends upon the instrumentality of the will, which is not taught anywhere. There's no text anywhere for it. And the inflectional morphemes of the grammar basically teach that you cause you. And for example, in Mark 16:16, it says, the one who deliberately causes himself to believe, for example. Then it says, but the one who deliberately causes himself to disbelieve. So both are deliberate. So how could a person deliberately cause himself to disbelieve? And I think disbelieve, it has the alpha privative in front of it. But I believe that is the Strong's number 569, G569. And I believe that believe is G4100. I wish I'd looked that up. But anyway, the good news is if that's wrong, that'll help Catalyze, give you more energy. I'm going to check that out. Well, I love it when people care to check things out because I want the feedback, and then that means you do the homework for me. But in Mark 16:16, it uses two different words because this even has its own vocabulary listing, and it has this letter A. But knowing that man is causal, so in one of the banters in Arminianism, it then front loads the hearing of the gospel with prevenient grace, with all these helping, enabling, which is fine. I have no concern. It's just once you've been primed to co-depend upon that, you really don't have much use for the text, the language any longer, because if the language is the determinant, it certainly places the scriptures back as that which has something to say and as the determinant. So before we get into bound will by Luther, free will, which just goes endless, we really need to ask, we're talking about something as simple as, is there an antecedent? To the pronoun. So we're really looking at just common questions that anyone could ask. So when someone says, as I was reading a debate, and an excerpt from the debate where it was asked, it says, the person said, the will of a person, it's not the will of a person that makes a decision. Well, that would mean now the will has become the person. And does your will have a mind of its own, I suppose? But it says the person acting by means of his own will. Well, really, that's again, it's just, you can't get rid of it. I mean, for example, if this is well, yeah, let's just view our brain here, if you will, and once this top's open, once you place things in here, now let's say you use words and you use concepts, whatever you want to call that. I mean, once that's in there, that's how the person views reality. It's called priming. These primers are placed in there. And a person that's unstable, that is, the only thing they have is a catalyst that results when you don't push the right button, you don't say the right words, you don't ask the right questions. You'll really never be able to have a conversation where the words in the Bible are used. So Calvinism has provided a new, another glossary. The Bible has a new glossary. It speaks of new glossary, unprecedented glossary. The Bible has lexicon, Old Testament, New Testament. But, you know, if you went and relied upon the words in the Bible that you could actually, if you didn't use Greek or Hebrew, I would recommend you start using the Strong's number system. For example, go to blueletterbible.org. Blueletterbible.org. It's all one word. Yeah, just go ahead and go there. Blue letter bible.org. And you'll be able to look all these things up. But once you've been introduced to it, I think it was called the backfire effect, where it wasn't anticipated, for example, until I began pastoring a church in a covenant community. I had not anticipated the backfire effect of people having first been primed to then not be interested in being scripted by words that are actually in the Bible, by meanings that are actually in the Bible. Because that's one of the advantages of being a Baptist. If you know the Baptists that I fellowship with or taught me the Bible more particularly, they were adamant that they weren't neither Calvinist nor Arminian. And I knew that I didn't know enough about the Bible to not be in one of those camps. Now, I've certainly found how much you can know with just a small amount of words. For example, just learning that disbelieve and believe are both words in the Bible. Just go to Mark 16:16, for example, and you learn something as easy to understand as Hifil causative action. And you learn passages, well, even in Psalm 23, it says, He maketh me lie down in green pastures. Maketh there is the causal stem. There's places where the word cause is in the text. But if you go through and you look up words to find their meaning, well, the inflection is also part of that when you're talking about verbs. So those of us who if you use the KJV, which I'm really surprised how many people tout the KJV but don't USE KJV. Using the Bible is to start with the English that we speak, and as I've done, I start with that standard there. I don't go and read other translations. That would be like, to me, it'd be like studying a map of North Little Rock, Arkansas, so I could better understand my ability to navigate, or improve my ability to navigate Jacksonville, Arkansas. So I don't know how that works, to just go look at other English translations when you can just go back to the words and look up those words, especially just use the numbers. You can just go look up G568, you can go look up G4100, and no one has to notice that you don't really know the funny shaped letters of Koine Greek, but you can use the language. Using the language is really, we can all do it now. We would lose the fascination, I guess, with people who like to talk and we love to rally around someone. And we've had people come here and ask, what's your take on something? I said, I don't have a take on it. I have a text. And as a Baptist who's neither Calvinist nor Arminian, it's not because I'm anti. I don't have the energy to be anti those. I do know, as a pastor of one of the Lord's churches, what encroaches upon us here as pastors. There's 3 more pastors here with me. What encroaches upon us is it's like leaven. In function, it permeates and then catalyzes. And literally, people will be here among us, and as soon as you come to a text and you actually teach it, you posit outwardly from it, you demonstrate how the verb is conjugated, how the noun's declined, or you emphasize the kind of action according to the inflectional morpheme, and all that's there, and you give what the word means, and that will always mean that, then you come to that text that happens to be one that they remember having been used to support maybe their Calvinism or their Arminianism, and it catalyzes them. And it's not always with energy to learn. It's sometimes a strange desire to burn someone. It's like, you didn't say it right. I have no idea how to communicate to people that they don't know this. They who don't know what they're talking about. They have a word that someone introduced. As someone pointed out, you can't find the phrase free will in the Bible, English Bible, and you can't find the word free will singular in the New Testament anywhere. And then they go into this long, slippery slope of, well, you can't find the word rapture in the Bible, and the word Trinity is not, but the word Trinity is in the Bible. But if you run into someone that uses that to justify importing words that aren't in the Bible, just tell them what Trinity is. It's 3, and it's the word one, and it was compounded. But yes, in that form, it does not appear in without words in between. Rapture is nowhere in the text. The noun doesn't exist, but why would that trouble anyone? I don't know. I would be more troubled to find things missing from the Bible that we know are there. So as a church, we are the pillar and the ground of the truth. We support the truth. We're not here to support the constructs. We're not here to support words that don't have Strong's numbers associated with it. And if the Bible interpretation is not the manner of teaching, then you can see why the leaven of Calvinism and Arminianism has certainly catalyzed great banter, argumentation, hurt, harm, feelings, warfare. You can go throughout history, and what's presupposed with this catalytic effect, catalytic effect, I guess, catalysis, I should say. What's presupposed by this catalysis, this incitement, that catalyzes, is someone already has things in them. It's already in our flesh. Let's say when you see open versus closed theism, let's just say we're in the category of theism. This is just the same conflict with a new name. So now we've got one conflict here. And if you come in and write living, first, living God appears in the Bible and holds great implication. So as we do in this class, and as I pastor in one of the Lord's churches, the Covenant Community, the scriptures, we use them to script people. And if you don't want to be scripted, then you certainly aren't interested in being discipled. But when you teach this from the first occurrence of it in the Bible all the way to the end of the Bible, you'll notice that in each context, which again, who wants to now go consult the context? Because the context will then again ignore your leaven. It will ignore your glossary of terms. It will ignore your pre-understanding. And it will not catalyze your flesh, which we all have the same flesh, the interest of the flesh, which is to gnash and to gnaw. So that's what we'll do. Let's just call it, well, we have opponents, if you will. We have A, whatever you want to call it, A and B. And this is gnash and this is gnaw. And the conflict. So it's catalyzed. But when you study this, it really tranquilizes. Paul had said to Timothy about praying for the rulers, the leaders, the kings, and those in high places, so that we might live a quiet and peaceable life, tranquility. Studying is very, it tranquilizes. First, when you study this, you go look for, let's say, references. Where does it occur in the Bible? And then you go to the context. And then you, you do your word study. Because you can look at references, Deuteronomy 5, and then go to the context in English, and then start your word studies, and that's where you can go to blueletterbible.org, for example. You can do etymology. You can start all these things, but now this is really not the direction. This doesn't go here, where you can, have all this conflict. This doesn't go here, where you have all this conflict. There's no Strong's number for a closed God phrase. There's no Strong's number for open God phrase. So you can see just that alone, but now what do? This would not fuel and catalyze the conflict that seems to be how the economy is driven. What if the only candidates we had in office had first demonstrated proficiency in political science, or had to go and acquire at least a Bachelor of Arts in political science, we wouldn't have a lot of people running for office. We sure wouldn't have the vitriol, the big rallies. We wouldn't have the this one points his finger and that one points it back. So that's what leaven in function. So when I speak of the leaven of Calvinism, Arminianism, in function, it certainly seems to catalyze, cause a reaction that just seems to build on the other. But it doesn't seem to be finding people really interested in why we're here. For example, a New Testament church, we're here, the Bible even says we're the temple of the Spirit of the living God. Now that would hold some implication that would really cause someone to contemplate that. If one of his New Testament assemblies is called naos, which refers to that particular holy of holy places, then the value of a local church would definitely not be simply communicated by such a trite phrase of local church. It's the Lord's church being somewhere, a locative case, but local church, local has very little to do with who we are and what we are. It says very little except the fact that if you're interested in the one that meets here in Jacksonville, Arkansas, 2200 Marshall Road, but what do you do once people have been so primed? Like I said earlier, you'll have a lot of conflict. Let's just draw this poor picture again, and let's just say this is some dear soul's brain, and it's had all these this zeme placed into it, so now it becomes enzyme, as we know the word in our language, brought from Germany or German. Well, if this person wants to battle, there's people out here, and they really think that, as Jesus said, there's people that will actually go to the point of killing you based on thinking they're doing God a service. And Saul of Tarsus is a perfect example. He said, I'm typical. He's typical of someone who had learned of the Messiah, knew of Yeshua of the Old Testament, knew of the Hamashiach of the Old Testament, the Messiah. He went to Saturday school. He was there with the flannel graphs. He was there learning about David and Goliath. He was there the whole time. He was there learning about the Creator and the Genesis account of creation. He knew of the prophets speaking of him. He knew of the prophet that Moses pointed toward. But he had then somehow something called Judaism, which is not the law of Moses, and it's not the scriptures. Jesus himself said, had the Judaizers who confronted him, he said, had they believed Moses, Moses being the word referring to the Torah, the Pentateuch, then they would have believed in him, but they didn't. They then advocated themselves or presented themselves as fans of Abraham and said that they were children of Abraham, but that wasn't the case, because Jesus said, well, if you were, if Abraham were your father, then he longed for my day, and here you're killing me. So you're definitely not doing the works of Abraham. Why would Abraham want to kill the Messiah that he believed in? Why would Moses want to point someone to someone other than Jesus the Christ, the Messiah who came to the earth? But because of the primers, Saul is a perfect example of what conversion looks like. Someone that can be so primed against the one. He could be a Hebrew of the Hebrews. He could be of the tribe of Judah. He could be a Pharisee of the Pharisees. He could have excelled in all things. He could be the perfect man in the context of religion, and yet he'd be so far removed that he would be rejecting Jesus himself. And today people are accepting or rejecting people based on fallible soteriological constructs, fallible constructs in all types of areas that have now become systematized in theology. So what do? Well, either you're scripted by the scriptures or you are on your own. You will use vocabulary that has no corresponding, I'll just say Strong's numbers. It'll have no context. You can't reference the text, the verse. You can find living God in the Bible. So when we have formed categories, those are for educational purposes. Then you have Bible categories. Those are inspired. That's literally a more definitive way of describing words in the Bible that you'd find in your lexicon. Then you have modified categories. Now you've just moved from Bible categories, formed categories, to modified categories, to where now we're not talking about a category that's nowhere found, the phrase free will, but now we've also have bound will, nowhere found, and now we're looking for libertarian or compatibilism, so we just keep building steps and steps removed. So for a Bible teacher in one of the Lord's New Testament churches, for people who want to live in this community, this covenant community, covenant body, live with the interests of each other, serving and assuring that God the Father receives the glory by Christ Jesus in his assembly, and we're here to nurture and foster our children in the admonition of the Lord, as the Bible says, and we're here to grow in this covenant. Men to be husbands to their wives, fathers to their children, brothers in a covenant, women to be wives to their husbands, mothers to their children, and sisters in the covenant, and of course everything else in between, brothers and sisters living as brothers and sisters. Really, the Bible has no value unless that's what you're involved in. But to be involved in one of the Lord's churches is so unique and so different. But as a Bible teacher and in one of the Lord's churches, this leaven just continues to come in, and people present themselves, come to our church, and they literally want to know, what's my take on something? I have no take on it. They want to know, how do we do something? I said, well, here's what the text says. And it's really remarkable, because some have never even considered, is our church actually a covenant community, or are we just a venue where we walk in, someone performs, and we file out the back, and we really don't want to be involved in that which God holds interest in, where his Son presides as the head, and where the Father receives glory from the Son in that assembly, and as we love one another reciprocally, speaking according to the teachings of Jesus, because in the Bible the commandments of Christ are that which by our keeping, guarding, adhering according to, demonstrate and prove that God sent Jesus Christ into the world. So you have a good day, and know that love is to keep and adhere his commandments. But this is what I mean in this Koine Project Class, for those of you that have been faithful to subscribe to it, to study it, and search out the scriptures for yourself. You learn that when it comes to finding a reference for something, finding context, and then doing word studies, you'll find that that really doesn't incite or catalyze the flesh, such as vitriolic expressions, harmful terms, diminishing other people. That comes from the leaven of fallible constructs gone amok, I guess. They've just gone off the rails. And that's what people do. They just go as far as they need to, and then they go too far and they can't return. But if Saul of Tarsus could go escalate as far as he did with the false primers and the leaven of Judaism, you can walk away from Calvinism and Arminianism anytime you wish. So you have a blessed day. And yes, this class is now, the chief feature of it is it's by video. I'll be informing you all under the COVID-19 protocol when we will be assembling again, under what circumstances. So you have a blessed day.